Welcome to our monthly ACTS Town Hall. Thanks to our member companies for helping make these town halls possible. Your support makes our mission a reality. Together in safety, stronger in collaboration. The ACTS Town Halls are an open forum to discuss concerns and present potential solutions to improve damage prevention and excavation safety. These town halls are meant to be a discussion, and you're encouraged to ask questions and share solutions. A recording of this town hall will be posted on our YouTube channel and sent via email after the town hall has concluded. Before the end of the town hall, each of our panelists will highlight a moving forward step to ensure we stay focused on practical and impactful solutions. We are pleased to have a knowledgeable and experienced panel with us today. So to get us started, our moderator will begin with brief introductions.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining me and my friends. I'm Mike Sullivan. I'm the president of Utility Safety Partners. I've been part of this organization for 15 years. I've seen a lot of change in that time, and I'm very honored to be moderating this panel today, creating the culture of behavioral change. And I'm also equally fortunate to have seen a lot of that, and my gray hair will attest to that. Joining me today are my friends Bryant Thomas and Louis Panzer. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves because I'll probably mess that up. Bryant, if you don't mind, can you introduce yourself, please? And you're on mute right now, by the way.
While he's found his
yes,
mute,
thank you.
I'll go ahead and keep the ball rolling. I'm Louis Panzer. I'm the executive director of North Carolina 811. Been in this role for 16 years. Like Mike, I've seen a lot of things change in that period of time. Been in the industry about 26, 27 years. Instead of my hair going gray, I just lost mine. So going through all this, but yeah, absolutely. We're all, very much committed to safety, as I'm sure everybody here on this call is. And I think this is a great topic to really get down to the fundamentals of what that really looks like from the ground up. Bryant?
Thanks, Louis. Back over to you, Bryant. You're unmuting and muting. I'm not sure what's happening.
Yeah, he had it first.
There you are. There you are.
Don't touch anything. There you go.
Oh, he's unmuted.
Oh.
We're embracing
I've been
the
all
change.
locked up here, so I apologize.
You're good. You're good.
I'm Bryant Thomas, and I've been honored to be a part of the panel today. I've looked up to Louis and Mike and Roger for many years and have learned a tremendous amount from them. And to be asked to be a part of the panel today is a distinct honor. I come in with some industry knowledge where I spent many years at AT&T, a great organization. Spent some time on board of directors across our great country for the 811 systems, and also served at the Michigan 811. And I currently get to work for an organization that prides itself in living the 811 message that we often hear of collaboration and teamwork and safety as the pinnacle of that. At ARC Ventures, where we're doing all sorts of different jobs right now. We're doing fight replacement to utility locating. So this is a great opportunity to talk about how we make this cultural change.
Thanks, Bryant. And before we kick that off, there are so many elements of the damage prevention process that contribute to safety of everybody, and we're trying to capture all of those in our discussion today about changing the culture of safety. And I have some words here that were provided to me from Roger, and I'm just going to go over a little bit to set the stage here. Rules, procedures, and technology, oh my, do not change outcomes, people do. And lasting improvement in safety and damage prevention only happens when the right behaviors are consistently practiced, reinforced, and owned. You have to own that at every level. It's important that stakeholders, like all of us, quit working within our silos and build connections with one another through shared values, ownership, and making the everyday decisions in the field and in leadership roles, thereby creating that culture where doing the right thing becomes the normal way of working, even when nobody's looking. And I think we all practice that. We all try to practice that, even when nobody's looking. And I know personally, I've always been driven by, what's the right thing to do? Do the right thing, and challenging status quo without really going out to, that's my MO. I'm going to challenge status quo. Not at all. I'm just driven by whatever is the right thing to do, whether that is procedurally for the damage prevention process or working with my colleagues at Utility Safety Partners or the organizations of similar interests that I work with on a routine basis. So let's get right into it. I'm going to ask this question just of both of you, so jump right in. Is damage prevention primarily a compliance issue, or is it a cultural issue? How do you see that? I'll go to you, Lewis, first.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, it's kind of a hybrid of both. And I guess one of the concerns, from a compliance issue, sort of the stick. But the one thing that always drives most of this work is ROI. So it's more of a looking at it as a line item or as an expense safety sometimes, in damage prevention in general. I think it's sort of siloed. I think compliance hovers over it in a manner that, can sort of, spank you or slap your hands. But if the return is greater sometimes, and that's the drive, then sometimes I see it as a backseat. I also see that safety tends to be a sine wave in organizations, where it's funded, when there's an incident, it's really taken seriously, put to the front of the line. As time goes by and those efforts are working and there's a safe workplace, the question comes about, well, why are we spending the money so much in this category? So the focus drifts. You see the sine curve, the cost, the pay come back down, the effort, and then something happens, and again, it just makes for a wave like that.
Interesting. How about you, Bryant?
Yeah, I would say it's both. And essentially, especially at the entry level, in our boots on the ground level, I would say it's culture. I'm going to say that these teams that go out into the field, they're looking at safety and they take it out there as part of their culture. It's trained to them every day. And I'm going to say it's compliance level. The higher up you go in hierarchy in organizations, because that you're going to see some of these organizations where somebody never sees the field. They never have boots on the ground themselves. Their boots never touch the mud. And if they are, then it's not necessarily they're engaged in it. They're out there for an opportunity to meet some of their teams. And so as I see it, these folks they have two different carrots that they're chasing. One of them, they're chasing that safety carrot. They're also chasing the or avoiding that stick, I guess. And so the boots on the ground, I see them more as that they're ready for that culture. They're engaged in it until it impacts the day-to-day job. And then they've got to make some changes, and they adjust, they shift, because that's what they're used to doing.
Roger, I'll ask you, a man who needs no introduction apparently, because I skipped right over that with you. But you've heard from Lewis and Bryant now, and I know you come at this from a different perspective. So what's your take on that in terms of, is it a compliance issue, or is it a cultural one, or is it a blend, as Lewis and Bryant are seeing?
I agree with them. I believe it's a blend. I think compliance answers the question, what am I supposed to do? And we do those things because we have a fear of penalty, citation, might lose her job, whatever. I think culture is the main player in a long-term solution. We've been chasing damage prevention for many years. I've been in the industry for more than 50 years this year. We've been chasing something we cannot catch, and if we caught it, we wouldn't know what to do with it. Instead of focusing on changing behavior, we're living and dying with a number that's elusive. Can't define it. You can't get enough data to verify whatever you're chasing is even catchable. So I think culture teaches us to believe in something. And I've seen organizations change their culture, both excavating, locating, even 811 call centers. I've seen cultures change. And when cultures change, they are oblivious to all the noise on the outside because this is who we are. And you be who you want to be. I'm going to be who we are. And when you get to that point in your career and your organization, the strength of your organization, long term will have more influence on safety and damage prevention than what we're chasing today, in my estimation.
I'm going to challenge that a little bit before we move on. If I look at compliance, legislation, regulation, all those things, right? The rigidity of anything, in this case, damage prevention, and culture. It's in my view, it's what came first, the chicken or the egg, the culture or the compliance. And I think it's the culture. I do. I think that's the pervasive element that pushes us forward. And the compliance, those are minimum requirements, right? The absolutely bare minimum requirements, and best practices being that's the utopia of damage prevention. Yeah. That's the culture. That's what's driving us. So I would challenge that a little bit, and that in order to be compliant, you have to have that culture. To be to be compliant, not just to the written word, but compliant to your culture, to be honest to your culture. That to me is that's where I would challenge it. Now, if we continue operating the way we are today, where will we be in the future? 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? And personally, I look to where we've been and where we are today, and it's like, wow, we're still chasing the same carrot, right? We're still going after that same thing. So, Bryant, what do you see there in terms of where we are today, where we've been, and where are we going?
Oh, absolutely. And I think we're at a point, I'm going to start with the field again. I think they're much more agile with this change, and they're much more able to adapt and to comply to rules and regulations that come down. And so I think that our field teams out there in this industry are much more capable of quick change. And as I see some of the organizations and having been a part of them, the cost benefit for early adoption to change sometimes just isn't seen in some organizations. So as they see and do their analysis, they're waiting for technologies to come in and really offer waiting for those technologies to offer cost reduction and to make compliance even less expensive. So it turns back and they can put that onto the bottom line, and it shows a return on investment much easier. A lot of things that we do in our industry, we can't put a dollar sign on, and that creates, in my opinion, it creates resistance for advancing new technologies the higher you go. But there's also a barrier to entry when you have thousands of employees and you're trying to implement new technology. Barrier to entry on the cost of this new technology can bury an organization.
Sure can, yeah.
Where when you have 50 people, it might be really expensive, but once you implement it, you can start to reap the rewards quickly.
Lewis,
And
you and I have been around
yeah,
for a long time. Obviously, we agreed to that earlier, and we show it in different ways. But I don't think it's any secret that I get frustrated by status quo, and doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result, and that kind of drives me nuts. But anyway, we've done a lot of that. I think we've done a lot of that in the industry, and I just have to look to the DIRT report, for example. The various DIRT reports say, well, if I just change the date on this, it might be the same report as a couple of years ago. And I hate saying that because we get mired down in the details. But from your perspective, where do you think we're going to be in 5 years? You've got that history behind you.
well, yeah, and so it's interesting you mentioned the DIRT report because I think it takes a lot of heat every year as just being the voice of this is what we have, this is what we see. It doesn't change much. I mean, you talk about the three buckets, of responsibilities for these damages, kind of landing in these classes, and they never really change. They shift a little bit here and there, but you can't really, in my opinion, fault the DIRT report for the information that it's providing because it's basically an assimilation of what it's collected. The problem is taking action on it. What actions are actually, where does this data that sits there, because it is a large amount that we sit on top of within organizations, DIRT as well, but the One Call 811 organization, we sit on a tremendous amount of information that tells us what kind of compliance we're seeing. Like, in other words, late locates. What is the impact of that? Excavators that are not contacting us and then creating damages. So we see all that information. We've been sitting on this report. We can't say we're sitting on it, but we've been letting it kind of evolve over the course of 10 years. And of course, there was the whole 50 and 5 challenge, which, I put in my notes that as far as 5 years goes, that's not going to happen. I don't know that it ever really was. Even 10 and 5, we'll be fortunate if the behaviors don't change, if we don't see a fundamental shift in the leadership and getting this culture established all the way down with holding people accountable and that kind of thing. We'll be lucky if we can even get it to flat in 5, honestly, because the amount of work that we have happening, the amount of new companies coming in that may or may not even be aware of this culture that we're trying to establish for what it is. They may have an idea of their own individual safety cultures, but one of the things I just heard recently is it's got to be, culture is one of those things that means it's deep seated. It's a deep rooted established value. And that has to be the overriding thing, the lives, as mentioned before. Technology is important. It streamlines things, but it ultimately comes down to the people who are putting equipment into the ground and making decisions every day when they have a choice, when they can do this or they can do this. They can take a safe approach or they can maybe cut a corner. And depending on what the priority is above them, telling them you've got to get so many feet per day in or whatever it might be, or you need to watch out for your brother and make sure everybody's got their equipment correct and that they're responding correctly to the to the laws and that. That's where it has to be. It has to be that person on the ground has to have the stop authority in a situation even. And I don't think that that's widely granted. So that's a cultural thing that needs to be not just broadcast, but championed from the top.
Yep. Thanks for that.
Can I
Sorry,
jump
Frank.
in?
Yeah,
and
go ahead. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Ask a question. In Lewis, you just hit on this, and one of the things that I think becomes very challenging is we're all different, and so the laws and regulations across our 50 states and the provinces of Canada, the rules and regulations aren't the same. So when you have somebody who transverses a state line to do work, we expect them to continue to follow the law, and they're feeling like they're probably an expert. They've been doing this work. but they may not be an expert in the state that they just went to work in. And so how do we make those incremental changes to make compliance easier for somebody
Well,
who's like
that
that?
responsibility comes from the people who are sending those people across those lines, in my opinion, first of all. Second of all, if you're talking about, this is one of the struggles we saw with the fiber projects, is that you've got state, state situations where they're issuing money down to these folks in the form of grants. They have the power to implement certain regulations, you could say, meaning you shall take training in the state that you're going into. You shall show that you're aware of these things, that you shall be compliant with these particular things to receive the money. Whoever it is that controls the purse strings and puts those boots into the ground over there is responsible for making sure they don't send somebody in there, into the field without the information they need to do the job correctly.
I'm going to pivot a little bit here. I love the culture versus legislation thing, and I'm going to go to you, Roger, because you're free to speak. You have nothing holding you back on this. And Brian, you're absolutely right. There are different pieces of legislation, whether it's provincially, state, or nationally, and I have my views on that. But I'm going to ask Roger, where do you see the friction point between culture and legislation?
It's a mindset. If we do things because that's our job, or if we do things because we have to do it, that's really not the culture that we're striving to achieve, I wouldn't think. Mm-hmm. So I know a pretty large contracting group who works in multiple states. And 5-6 years ago, they made a determination at the top of their organization to change the culture. Here are some things we are not going to allow our people to do. I don't care what state we're working in. So nobody has to make them know what the state law is. When they move into another state with a different law or really stringent enforcement or no enforcement whatsoever, it doesn't impact how they do their business. They go into a state, they're expected to know the law. They're expected to call. They're expected to wait. When the client says, okay, you got 3 boring rigs in this town, I want 5 more, they say, no, we can't do that because they do not have enough locators in this area to handle that. We're not talking about contract locators only. We're talking about these small municipalities. No, we're not going to do that. Now, the utility will hire another subcontractor to come in and put 5 more boring rigs in, if that's what the utility wants to do. But they're not going to force this company, who has created a culture of working together, to do what he knows is not sustainable. I think the culture we're really talking about here is to understand that if we keep doing what we're doing right now, in 5 years, we'll probably have better technology. We'll have more data. We'll likely have more regulations because we tweak a lot of legislative things. Oh, if we just do this, it'll solve the problem. And it rarely solves a problem. And I've been involved in lobbying for a lot of legislative changes in multiple states. I go back and look at those states. It really hadn't made that much difference.
Yeah, I agree with you there.
When you're dealing with people
Yep.
who do the right thing, you really didn't need to make that change at all.
Yeah.
You got to have the change because you got to have some structure. But at the end of the day, it's all about culture, because culture ultimately determines behavior.
And one of the things that you had coming in here, I'll just segue it for you, Mike, but the idea of what is it that fractures trust between the parties? How do you get trust between these different stakeholders, right? Because you hit on it. If somebody's going to bring in another sub and they're underneath somebody, then the expectations of folks are we don't have continuity here, a continuity of culture. If one group in that in that chain decides they're going to break that, it fractures the trust. It fractures that ability to carry forward with any kind of commitment. It really does need to. We call it a shared responsibility, but the shared responsibility is to establish that culture at every point in the chain.
100%. Yep. That's
Absolutely.
a very valid point, Lewis. That everybody has to share that responsibility, but share the culture too, right? And that's why I wanted to get at that question with legislation versus the culture. Legislation is important; it's a minimum requirements. But I also think that we perhaps rely too heavily on legislation regulation, and in some cases, it holds us back. It really does. And I've seen that directly here in Alberta, and I've witnessed it when I was working with Transmission Pipeline Company that operated in both Canada and the U.S. There was some areas of operations like, why aren't we doing that? Well, the law says this. Well, who cares? We have a better mousetrap. Why aren't we applying it across the enterprise? And that became a very big challenge within that company. And I see it, also with some of the things we're doing in Alberta that other places in the world say, you know what, we'd like to try that, but we can't. The legislation won't allow it. And that to me is like, okay, that something's wrong here. If the overall objective is to reduce damages, right? That is it. And there's a better mousetrap to do so, and legislation is holding us back, there's something very wrong. So anyway, that's where I was seeing that nexus point, right?
Yeah.
If cultural shift is belief driven, I think we can all agree on that.
Mm-hmm.
What belief needs to change before the culture shift starts to happen? I'm going to go to you, Lewis. So if we're going to see that culture shift, if we're really going to get there, what beliefs have to change? What do we have to change?
Well, again, going back to the fact that it has to establish top down, right? I mean, the belief has to be that the chasing the dollar and the competitive nature of all this that's obviously shareholders. We have to respond to them. But the priority, the number one thing is we're not going to sacrifice safety for the dollar. We talk about, safety isn't what you do. It's who we are as a group, as opposed to, we have to raise our shares $3 a share or something. So we need to get this customer base. The belief has to be that, first of all, the belief has to be understood that you can still reach your ROI goals. In fact, you'll do it much better, and you'll serve the communities that you're getting ready to introduce your services to much better if you are doing everything in compliance and treating everybody correctly through the chain. This communication, a lot of times people think it happens, solely through the 811 centers. And we always have to stop that and say, no, we are one of the conduits, but that communication has to exist outside of that, has to exist through UCCs, has to be established through the belief that I can trust you, that you're going to let me know if something's wrong or if there's something going on. And by the way, I'm going to help you understand maybe your best path for this fiber that you're taking, because I've got these maps and can help you. There has to be a belief in trust in the other people who are involved in this protection.
Interesting. Yeah, I agree. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to as moderator, but go ahead, Brian.
I agree. It's that trust in building it. And I think that often in business, we lack an abundance mindset, and especially at the leadership level. There's the idea that there's only so much pie to go around, and if we don't grab it all, our shares are not going to expand. Our shareholders are going to be upset. Wall Street's going to downgrade our stock, and we're in trouble. And I get that, but I also look at the past. As we came out of COVID, if you're a student of the market, you're going to notice that the amount of growth that has happened has been tremendous. And now if you go into the AI industry and you look at NVIDIA and Meta and Alphabet and some of these other organizations, they've just been, they call it a merry-go-round, or they're self-funding each other's business because they're sending so many dollars back into different parts of the business. And they've all said there is so much growth in front of them that there's room for all of these players. But eventually, there's going to be a shift. Some are going to rise to the top. Others are going to be, uh, they're going to go through an acquisition and different things like that. But this mindset that there's only so much, and that if I don't grab it all, if I don't, to Lewis's example, okay, my utility wants me to add 5 more contractors, and if I don't do that, then somebody else is going to take my money away. Well, you know, I can guarantee you that there's an opportunity, if you're good, to take your extra 5 contractors and go to another community that isn't quite as overwhelmed and put them to work and make that money over there. Allow somebody else to come in if that's what they're going to do, but voice your concern to your customer, going, this doesn't make sense. This is going to impede the business, our processes that are already in place, and it's going to hurt your image within a community, because you're going to have a lot of damages, or you're going to have your work's going to get slowed down, and people are going to have dug up yards. They're not going to be happy with you because you're not going to be able to complete it in the timeline that you're envisioning. How can we do this? What can we do to make this more successful? Those are really difficult conversations, because generally there's timelines, and especially with federal funding or with projects that come with dollars attached, that there's timelines associated with that. And if it's not put in within a certain amount of time, your dollars disappear and you're in trouble.
So here we are again, Roger, you're taking on this nexus point of discussion where we have, safety and the culture of safety, or damage prevention in this case, really hitting that monetary side, right? Where the budgets matter. So I'm going to ask you, I mean, of course, we can't throw all the money in the world at it and solve all the problems. It doesn't exist. But, and it was touched on by Lewis and Bryant as well, that leadership has to own this. It has to understand the blend of, yes, the budgets are important, but so too is that culture of safety, in this case, damage prevention. How do you see that, and how do we blend that so both matter?
Well, first off, you have to believe that it can coexist.
Yep.
If your position is it has to be one or the other, that's the culture we live in right now.
Yeah.
I hear that all the time. One of the roles I have is to function as the executive secretary of Mississippi's Enforcement Board. I handle all the complaints, all the damages, all the violations that come into Mississippi. I handle them all, or our office does. I talk to these people routinely. I don't have to talk to them. That's not part of my job, but I want to learn about what they're facing and why they make decisions. A culture that's already made its decision as to how it's going to act or react won't have to make a decision out in the field, because you know who you are and you know what you believe and you know what you're going to do. The belief, in my estimation, that has to change, that will allow us to accept the fact that they can coexist, is we have to quit believing that damage prevention is some other department. In our humongous organization, we have departments, and this department focuses on this, this, this. Now, what we've done is we've combined claims and damage prevention. That's like oil and water. Claims has got a very specific function. It's to collect for damages. Damage prevention, on the other hand, should have a very specific focus, and that is, how in the world did that happen? And what was the root cause, so we can make sure that don't happen again? That's not what happens. What happens is who do I bill?
Yeah.
We're going to rat on somebody for violating the law who may be an excellent company, but they screwed up this time. And we're going to give them the same slap that we give somebody who routinely violates the law. We have to understand that, me personally, I am responsible for protecting underground infrastructure every decision that I make. My culture has to allow me to do that. One final thought. I agree that leadership has to buy in. But leaders in these complex organizations are so far removed from where the problems are that if they don't have solid people at the lowest level feeding up to the influencers in the company that can get with the leadership and say, this makes sense, it may not happen as quickly as it needs to. We do not need to wait for leaders to lead us.
And I said at the top of our town hall, I'm driven by doing the right thing. And sometimes the right thing is to look at the budget and say, you know what, we can't do what we really want to be able to do because we are limited by resources. That doesn't stop me from thinking I've got to find a way. But then I also have to consider, is this the hill to die on today? Right? Is this the one? And that belief that, that drives you to do the right thing isn't just on the big things. It's on everything. It's on every little thing. And, I get challenged on that week to week on all kinds of decisions that come my way, or if I'm guiding my colleagues in a discussion, like we're trying to figure out what's the best path forward. We all get challenged by that. But there's so many nexus points that come along. And unfortunately, yes, budget is one of those big resource elements that can limit us. So, we tolerate that. We understand that. We have to live within the confines of that. But if that's the case, what are we tolerating that prevents the industry from going to the next level beyond that budget? And it's a tough question. What else is holding us back? And I see it. I have some ideas of my own that I see day to day. Lewis, I'm going to go to you first for this one. This is a tough question because it's not just, hey, what's holding us back generally, but this is, we're tolerating some things.
So I've got a great example of that. One of the behaviors that I personally witnessed was my fiber or my DSL line getting cut by an excavator in North Carolina, and he was going to just repair it himself on the spot. And I said, you can't do that. And he goes, oh no, I do it all the time, and it's understood by the operator, because they let me do it. If I've cut it, they want me. Now that's a behavior that's not in parallel with what the expectation is by the law: reporting the damage, having the actual facility owner take responsibility, fix it, etc. But it's a mindset that's been percolated into the whole process and is clearly understand. You've got different mindsets depending on parts of the country that you're in. This is rural North Carolina. And that guy told me straight up, well, that may be the way they do things in Raleigh, but that's not how we do it out here. And I said, no, it's a state law. But anyway, I was tilting at a windmill and banging my head on the wall. But that's an example right there of a behavior that's tolerated. If the utility said no, that can't be, then that wouldn't be. And the other part of this is, when you talk about this, is we often forget. We said we were going to touch on, sacred cows and elephants in the room. Look, folks, the utilities are the people running 70% of those excavation jobs, themselves or their contractors. They hold the contracts for locators, so they can absolutely be the ones to hold those contracts responsible through quality. And ultimately, they're the ones that are protecting what it is they have. They don't want to be damaged, but all those things should not be siloed into different areas. They should realize that they all are part of the same thing, and not look to, like you said, just pass the liability on it. I heard somebody say, this isn't a safety business. This is a liability shift business is what it is. And how can we pass that down to the next side so that I don't have to absorb it? If they're going to take it on, then that's what they decided to do. But this is a cultural shift that has to change. We have to own what our roles are and take them seriously.
What are you thinking on this, Roger? You want to challenge some of what Lewis is saying, or do you agree?
I think I absolutely agree. I think I would just say that we've normalized poor performance. We've looked over actions and become victims, if you will, to the idea that damages are going to happen. It's a function of excavation. The more excavation, the more damages. And so basically what we're saying when we say that is there's nothing I can do about it, so I'm a victim. And I think that victim mentality has permeated even our strongest and best organizations. And now we're just straight lining. We're just talking about things, but not really expecting any change. And I think the change is going to happen when folks like you guys on this panel, thanks again for being here. I think the change is going to happen when we say, no, it's got to happen. And we're willing to lead that charge. And that, I think that's what the industry is waiting on, not the CEOs of all these organizations. They may be the CEOs, but I would argue they may not be the leaders of the industry that we need to make this thing happen. It either can happen or it can't. I believe it can.
I have a question here from one of the attendees. I'm going to read it verbatim. I think it's directly applicable to where we are in this conversation. And they're asking, can you speak to the utility's responsibility surrounding public safety and getting leadership on board with a culture of safety? And we've talked about that top down. That's how I think we've all experienced that to a varying degree, good or bad, in between. I'm going to ask you, Brian, we've touched on this a lot. We've danced around it. But speaking directly from the utility's responsibility surrounding that public safety element, where are your thoughts?
My thought is, if you go to any utilities leadership, and Roger just stated that a little bit, is that they all believe that they have a culture of safety installed in their organization and that they adhere to it 100% or 90-some% of the time. And it's what they do every day. Safety is their job. I was just on a town hall the other day with some gas operators, and the point is their job's to send their crews home at the end of the day. Their jobs are to be safe and make sure everybody gets there. I guarantee you that every CEO believes that that's instilled in their organization. But their CEOs also understand there's different ways to get to a destination. And so as we get there, they give a lot of opportunity and responsibility to those that report to them and so on down the line to be able to come up with the right way to get to the end, cross that finish line. And I think that that's where sometimes, and not everybody's in the same group. And sometimes people make decisions because they feel under pressure, or they feel like they're not meeting or that expectation, or something's going on. So they make decisions that start to allow external vendors to not adhere to the exact same standards that they have internally.
So they're being driven by that contract, right? Being driven by, I want to secure the contract. What am I going to cut? Lewis, you had a comment with respect to that question from one of the attendees. Can you expand on that? Talking about the middle management being the nexus.
I think it's it just sort of struck me because we've talked about this and we've said, okay, it's got to start at the top. But then Roger also says, and I believe too, that every day somebody puts on their boots and they go out in the field and they at a crossroads at some point in the day where they have to make a decision. Somewhere in the middle there are most of the people who are attending our conferences, who are attending our meetings, who are members of our board of directors, directors who are damage prevention professionals. And they sort of hold the key, because if they can take data like DIRT, this is just kind of bringing it all back around. If they can assimilate the data and share up the chain where there's a benefit to the corporation to take this mindset on, and then also share down the chain that why this is important, and going down, they may be the nexus to actually implement or get that momentum going around a cultural shift. Because like you said, the top's so detached and the bottom is taking orders. So it's got to kind of be somewhere in the middle where they respect the people they hired to do the work. That's why those leaders put them in those roles. And at the bottom, they're looking up to get guidance. So maybe it is somewhere in the middle. I don't know. It's just a thought.
It is an interesting thought, and again, if it's not part of the leadership's operating MO, having that culture of safety, or in our case, damage prevention, then that middle management, they feel like they're pushing a boulder uphill using a rope, right? It's impossible. And so I'm going to ask you, Roger, if that is the case, if the middle management is really owning that culture, they see where the problems are, they want to bring forward change, and it's not happening, then you have a completely, not a dysfunctional culture, you got a dysfunctional organization. And
Right.
You've seen it, we've all seen it, some of us experienced it and had to make decisions. Where does that go, and how does that, I hate to use the word, but it's a bit of a virus within that organization. How do we get rid of that? And how do we avoid it to begin with? We don't even want to have to deal with it.
I would say, based on my experience of working with a lot of companies like that, really good companies, by the way. So I don't mean to infer that these companies aren't great companies, because they are, and I believe in them and I trust them. And they think they're doing the right thing, but I would say they're not. And I'll tell you, I believe that we've spent so much focus on training competence, which is important. We want people who are experts in what they do. But we've done that to the exclusion of instilling in our people at the lowest level and at the highest level we can reach, the need for defining what culture we're trying to achieve. A classic example that I've used, a real example that I've used a number of times, is a great company filed a complaint against an excavator for digging on an expired ticket, which the ticket was expired. And in the complaint, they were basically chastising this excavator for routinely doing that, although they'd never filed a complaint against that excavator for doing it. So for me, it was just the first time, right? For them, it was the 10th time. I don't know.
Yeah.
So I contact the excavator, and he sends me a photo of the day he was digging. And he said, they're right. I was digging on the expired ticket. But as you can see in this photo, where I damaged the utility, their yellow paint was 15 feet measured from where he damaged the facility. So I contact the complainant and said, is that right? And they said, well, that got nothing to do with it. Wait a minute, that's got everything to do with it. Well, if you'd called again, we might have located it in the right place. Okay, that could happen. I'll give you that. Probably it won't. Haven't been involved in locating. You see the paint, you're going to freshen the paint up. That's 90% of what we do. So we didn't learn anything except we were pointing fingers at one another. We didn't learn anything. We didn't learn why that damage really occurred.
Mm-hmm.
Had he called again, it would have still happened. And they would have painted the same mark. And somewhere along the way, we've missed the whole point. So now it's about enforcement. It's about legislation. It's not about safety. It's not about culture. It's about protecting ourselves from something that happened. I believe that we need more culture training in our conferences than we're getting. I think we need to be talking about the things that you guys are so perfectly identifying today. And I believe that we have to define what that culture is. We can't just talk about culture in generic terms. We've got to identify things like, yes, damage prevention and efficiency and profitability can coexist. And if our people who are making it happen every day will influence this going uphill, it's harder. We can get to those leaders in the organizations to at least get them to recognize the value of changing the culture of their organization. Just saying, we're all about safety, and everybody we hire, we tell them they've got to follow the law, is not working. It makes us feel good to say it, but it is not working in my world. I'll let you decide for yourself.
And we've talked a lot about the things that are holding us back, right? And I don't think we have to belabor that anymore, but there are some very real things that hold us back. And, budgets being one of them, resources, leadership, middle management, they have to work together. But let's turn that around. Let's turn it around, as we get close to the end of our town hall today. What excites you for the future? What part of what gets you charged up every day when you start your day, you end your day, and I don't think it ever really ends, but I'm going to go to you, Bryant, first. What excites you for the future, for all of us?
Absolutely. I think that we have, and going back to an analogy that was used, I think we've got some boulder carriers in this industry and in this world. And I think we have some young boulder carriers that will take the boulder up the mountain and come back and do it the next day and take the boulder up the mountain again and again and again. And that gets me excited as I work with young people. And I think of some of them that I know and that I've worked with. They're going to put this boulder on their shoulder and they're going to keep going at it. And they might get tired, but every day that they carry the boulder up the mountain, the stronger they get. And they understand that and they become good at it. And they distribute the message that we can do this. And this isn't a quick fix. This is going to be a cultural shift that not only takes place across not just one industry, across them all. And you're going to need boulder carriers on the 811 boards. We need boulder carriers in the excavator and the locator and the utility. We have to find, excuse me, we have to find these cultural leaders and changers and identify them and become good at identifying them and having them teach their peers to help carry that boulder. And I think it gets done. I think we're going to have technology that we already see the technology that's coming, and it's coming fast and it's great. Mm-hmm. And I think as we see this happen, the embracing of new technology is going to happen, and we're going to have people who really can help us move forward.
Roger, you've been here doing this for 50 years, and tip of the hat, my friend, to that. But
started when he was 6.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. What excites you? I mean, after 50 years of being in this world of damage prevention, what excites you about the future? What charges you up to keep going?
Well, getting the opportunity to meet folks like you and working with excavator groups and locator groups, the folks who are usually getting beat up, and sometimes for just cause, I understand that. But to see through the conversations and workshops, the training, the phone calls of organizations that have operated a certain way for a number of years decide they're going to give it a shot. Let's change the culture. It's not changing the culture doesn't happen. Let's see if we can change the culture. Changing the culture happens when you say we're going to change the culture. And once they change the culture, to hear those reports back in their organization, man, we should have done this 20, 30 years ago, whatever. So that's exciting to me. I'm by and large a person who is optimistic, I would say. And I like it when people say it can't be done. Then I enjoy waving at them when we get it done. Because you'll pass them by sooner or later because they ain't moving, right?
That's right. Yep.
So I just appreciate the challenge of still being able physically and mentally committed to a better way of doing anything. Whatever I'm doing, I want it to be better than it is. And most of the time it's my fault. I understand that. So you're continuing working on yourself. There's not going to be a national fix to this. It's going to be an organization. People have got to change. Organizations don't change. People change. They lead the organization in a different direction.
Thank you. Lewis, how about you? What charges you up to keep going?
Yeah, so for sure it's the people, but there are organizations that, I mean, one of the successes we've had in North Carolina, whether it's in proposing legislation and pulling it together or dealing with software changes or whatever it is the fact that we have established relationships between NUCA, AGC, NOLCA, the NCDOT, the telecoms, the gas. We have those relationships established where we can work things out. And, our board of directors is made up of a very diverse group of folks. And the excavators are respected. So I think one of the things that I get excited about is when I see those champions within those organizations like NUCA step up, lead a UCC filled with locators and operators and do it in a manner that's respectful, that gets that communication going. I mean, what we're really talking about here, gang, is communication, right? When we talk about damage prevention, we're in the communication business, meaning 811, but it doesn't start and stop there. It really this culture has to permeate through all the players that interact with each other. And I've interceded on situations where I've seen a person change their mind over it from a conversation or putting people together, breaking bread, getting somebody's card, understanding who they can call, working things out in advance. I'm excited for that. I'm also excited with the efforts in Sue and the design emphasis now and trying to build in a manner that's going to help aids damage prevention in the future, and mapping, healing those maps so that we can repetitively know where things are and not be, reinventing them every single time we go out for a locate. To me, that's just a squirrel on a wheel. And so I'm encouraged by the technology. I'm encouraged by the people. And, like everybody here on this call and on the panel, my heart is in damage prevention. Absolutely. So that's what gets me up in the morning. What crushes it is a situation where we have an explosion in Durham or something where we have a loss of life, injury, somebody having to go to a worker's home and tell family members that person's not coming back. That's the drive. But what gets me up every day and excited for the future is those people who are doing it every single day.
And I'm going to say my piece, even though I'm the moderator here. I still am excited about getting up every morning and doing what we do. I'm excited about what we've achieved as well. Building a better mousetrap. I'm honored to be leading the organization that I do. I'm honored to be working with the people whom I work with, and that's an absolute gift. I'm honored to see what we've been able to create collectively, my colleagues and I. Such fresh ideas always coming forward and leading that change. They're the ones who push that rope uphill, and I'm in a position where I can hold on the other end and pull it. and that to me charges me up. And whether it's the shifting from calls to clicks, the alternate locate provider, or now the damage prevention professional certification that we're just kicking off. These are big lifts that we've seen dramatic changes to reducing damages, the overall objective, but also reducing budgets and everything else. So I'm really honored to see that. But to touch on what Brian said, I'm also charged up by the youth coming in. I was at an event here, the Canadian Common Ground Alliance had its symposium back in the late fall, and we had asked people at the end, put up your hand if you're new here. And there were so many young people put up their hands, first-time attendees. That to me is wonderful, because it means there's people that are interested, they want to make that change, and Lord knows where they're going to take it from here. With that, we are at the end of our town hall, everybody, and thank you so much for attending. Please don't forget to fill out the survey so we can continue to improve and offer topics that are important to you. I want to thank my colleagues for joining us today, and thank you for the opportunity, Roger, to moderate today. It's always a pleasure.
Absolutely.
Thank you all.
Thank you for having me.